At 03:04 on a Sunday morning in October, a threshold compact reconnaissance element completed a full-spectrum survey of the southeastern quadrant of a continent and reported that 411,000 structures had gone dark. Businesses closed, municipal buildings closed, schools, offices, banks, distribution centers, every single node with a commercial designation, dark, unstaffed, locked, cold. Except for a small yellow rectangle beside an interstate exit in Georgia. That one was lit, staffed, and open. It had been open for the previous 11 years without interruption. It had been open through 2 hurricanes, 1 ice storm, a regional power failure, and something the local record referred to only as the incident with the wedding party. Sector analyst Pero Vane stared at that one yellow dot for a long time. Then he did what any competent intelligence officer would do, and asked the only reasonable question. Why is that one still on? If you're enjoying this already, hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps these stories reach more people. And drop a comment telling me what you would have ordered at 3 a.m. I read every single one. Now let's go inside because this invasion had already lost. It just hadn't been seated yet. The Threshold Compact had one rule about infrastructure, and it was the first line of their doctrine, and it had never failed them in 600 years. Continuity indicates value. That was it, that was the whole thing. Anything a civilization refuses to switch off is a thing that civilization cannot function without. Power plants run continuously. Water treatment runs continuously. Military command runs continuously. Hospitals run continuously. Everything else, shops, offices, schools, entertainment, closes, because closing is what you do with a thing that isn't critical. So when the Compact entered a new system, they didn't look for weapons. Any idiot can find weapons. They looked for what stayed on. Find what a species won't turn off, and you've found what it can't live without. Take that, and the rest surrenders to you out of sheer logistics. Prefect Osso Cade had used that model on 11 worlds. He had never once had to fight for a planet. He'd taken the power grid on Havis Reach, and the entire northern hemisphere had negotiated inside 9 days. He was, by every measure his own people used, extremely good at his job. So at 03:11, in the observation bay of a ship holding station 11 kilometers above rural Georgia, Cade looked at the same map his analyst was looking at, and he saw the same thing. 411,000 dark structures. One lit one. Analysis. Prefect, it's a Class 4 commercial structure, 211 square meters, single story, no hardening, no perimeter, no security systems beyond a door chime. Vane pulled the file. 11 vehicles in the lot, 9 occupants inside, including staff. Power draw is domestic. There's no defensive posture of any kind. And every comparable structure in a 200-kilometer radius is closed. Every single one, sir. There are 11,000 food service establishments in this region. At this hour, 400 are open. Of those 400, 381 are chain locations of a single organization. Vane looked up. Sir, they're all the same yellow. It's the same organization, same signage, same layout, same color. 381 nodes distributed across 9 of their administrative regions, all running continuously while everything else in the country is dark. Cade felt something he had not felt in 19 years, which was interest. Deeper. It took Vane 40 minutes, and what he found is why the following 11 hours happened. Sir, he said, I have a governmental document. Go. The Federal Disaster Management Agency of this nation, designation FEMA, maintains an informal metric for assessing the severity of a natural disaster. Vane's voice had gone slightly flat, which is what happens to an analyst who has stopped believing his own screen. The metric is the operational status of this organization's restaurants. Say that again. When a disaster occurs, sir, they check whether these locations are open. If the location is serving its full menu, the situation is classified as manageable. If the location is serving a limited menu, the situation is serious. And if the location is closed, he stopped. Analyst. If it's closed, sir, that's the highest severity classification. Because in the assessment of their own federal government, if that building has closed, the disaster has exceeded the capacity of local infrastructure to respond. There was a long silence in the observation bay. They measure catastrophe, Cade said slowly, by whether the yellow building is open. Yes, Prefect. Their government does this. It's in their published emergency management literature. It's called the Waffle House Index. It is named. Sir, they have named it. Cade stood there and looked at the little yellow dot beside the interstate exit, and he came to the only conclusion the doctrine allowed, and it was a beautiful conclusion, and it was completely wrong. That is their continuity of government network, he said. It is distributed. It is unhardened because hardening it would reveal it. It is disguised as commercial food service, and the disguise is so complete that the population eats there. He turned around. Prepare a landing. I want that node intact, and I want the personnel taken alive because those are the people who keep this country running when everything else stops, and their own government has told us so in writing. Sub-analyst NRL, who was 29 and had a career-limiting habit of finishing documents, said, Prefect, I've read further into the literature and I don't think. Prepare the landing. That was the first mistake. And honestly, look at what he had. 400,000 dark buildings, one lit. Same color 381 times across 9 states, named in a federal disaster document. If you'd been sitting in that chair, you'd have landed too. Store 1174 sat on a frontage road off exit 202, between a truck stop and a self-storage place, and at 3 in the morning on a Sunday it belonged to Verna Boyd. Verna was 63 years old. She had worked nights at that store for 22 of them. She had a name tag with her actual name on it, a pen behind her ear that had never once been used by anybody else, and a system of memory so refined that she did not write down orders. She said them out loud into the air, and the man at the grill knew what they meant. That man was Curtis Ames. Curtis was 51. He had run that grill for 19 years, and he had a specific way of standing at it, hips squared, one hand always resting on the corner of the flat top, that made him look less like an employee and more like a man docked to a ship. The third person on shift was Kimberly Nguyen, 24, 6 months in, who was still occasionally shocked by things. And there was a rhythm to that store between 1 and 5 in the morning that had never been written down anywhere, and that everybody who worked there could have recited. 1 a.m. was the bar crowd. Loud, cheerful, tipping badly, ordering hash browns in a tone of religious desperation. 2 a.m. was when the bar crowd got sad. 2 a.m. was the confession hour. Verna had heard more genuine human truth at that counter between 2 and 2:30 than most priests hear in a year, and she had never once repeated a word of it, which is the reason people kept telling her. 3 a.m. was the professionals, truck drivers, nurses coming off shift at the county hospital, 2 sheriff's deputies who came in at 3:15 almost every night and sat at the far end and did not want to talk to anybody. A man named Roy who worked overnight security at the storage place and came in on his break and had ordered the exact same thing for 6 years. 4 a.m. was the ghosts, people who could not sleep, people who had nowhere else, kids who'd had a fight with someone. And 5 a.m. was the fishermen, and then the sun came up and the store became a completely different building. At 03:02, Verna set a coffee down in front of Roy without being asked. At 03:03, Curtis said, "Order," and slid 2 plates onto the pass. At 03:04, 11 kilometers overhead, an interstellar military decided this was the nerve center of the United States government. The landing came at 03:31, and it was technically flawless. 2 dropships, one on the frontage road, one across the parking lot, taking out a light pole and the corner of a dumpster enclosure. 41 troopers in sealed gray armor deployed in a textbook touring cordon around the structure, sealed the exits, and established a hard perimeter in under 90 seconds. Inside the building, 9 people looked up. Nobody screamed. Nobody got under a table. There is full helmet footage of this, and it is genuinely one of the strangest documents of the entire war, because what you see is 9 human beings looking out a window at an armed alien landing, and then, one by one, going back to their food. Roy at the counter said, "Verna, is that for us?" "I don't know, Roy. Because if it's for us, I'm going to need more coffee." She refilled his coffee. The doors opened. Detachment Leader Sesh came in at the head of 11 troopers, weapons at low ready, into a room that smelled overwhelmingly of butter and cigarettes from an era before the smoking ban and hash browns and industrial floor cleaner. He announced at volume, through a translation unit set 2 notches too loud. This facility is under the control of the Threshold Compact. No one will leave. No one will transfer. Identify your senior operations officer. There was a pause. Verna Boyd, 63 years old, holding a coffee pot, looked him up and down. Table or booth? The T. Translation unit rendered this correctly. Sesh's helmet turned very slightly. Repeat. Table or booth, hun. There's 11 of you and I can't put 11 at a booth, so if you're all sitting together I need to know now, because I'll have to pull the foretop over, and I'll need Curtis to help me and he's got eggs down. We are not here to consume food. Then you're going to have to stand somewhere that isn't there, Verna said, because that's where the pass is and Curtis can't see the pass with you in front of it, and if he can't see the pass, food dies. Sesh did not move. Verna moved him, not physically. She simply started walking with the coffee pot on the exact line she always walked, which went from the counter to booth 3, and it went through where he was standing, and he had a choice between being walked into by a 63-year-old woman carrying hot liquid and stepping aside. He stepped aside. On the ship, that got logged as boarding element repositioned at direction of local personnel. NRL read that line 11 times. Prefect Cade came down at 03:52 and made the second mistake, which was to try to find the local authority. The compact playbook for this is genuinely sound. In an unhardened continuity node, the ranking figure will be the person the others orient toward. Watch the room. See who everybody looks at. Take that one. Cade came through the door, 2.5 meters of armored prefect, having to duck, which nobody had briefed him about, and stood in the middle of the dining area and watched. And here's what he saw. Everybody in that building oriented toward Verna Boyd. She controlled the flow of movement. She controlled the flow of information. When a new person came through the door, they looked at her and she told them where to sit. When somebody wanted something, they asked her. When somebody was upset, she went to them. But when she needed something to happen, she turned around and said 1 or 2 words toward the grill, and the man at the grill made it happen without acknowledgement, without confirmation, without ever turning around. Cade watched this for 4 minutes. The woman is the coordinator, he said quietly to Sesh. But she reports to the male at the cooking apparatus. He never responds and he never confirms. He simply executes. That's not a subordinate relationship. That's an operations officer taking direction from a commander who has no need to explain himself. Agreed, Prefect. He hasn't looked at us once. No, sir. 41 armed troopers entered his facility 20 minutes ago, and he has not looked at us once. Cade's voice had actual respect in it. That is the most disciplined thing I have seen on this planet. Curtis Ames had not looked at them once because he had a 12-plate order down and a hash brown well that needed scraping. And if he looked away from the flat top, he would lose the timing. And if he lost the timing, then Verna's whole rotation collapsed. And at 3 in the morning, with a full store, you do not get the rotation back for an hour. Cade approached the counter and stood at the end of the grill line. You are the commanding officer of this installation. Curtis flipped 4 eggs. Grill's hot, he said. Back up. I heard what you said, and I'm telling you the grill's hot and you're leaning over it, and I'd rather not explain to your people how you got burned in my store. Curtis put a lid on something. Verna, order for 11. They're not eating. Everybody eats. By 4 in the morning, the Threshold Compact had a full occupation posture on a 200-square-meter building and had learned nothing at all. And the reason it had learned nothing at all is the reason this story gets told. They were looking for a system. There was a system. It was just not a documented one, and the Compact's entire intelligence apparatus was built on the assumption that a functioning system somewhere has a manual. Vane's team pulled every piece of paper in the store. Here is the complete intelligence haul from the continuity of government node of the United States of America. 1 schedule handwritten, with 3 names on it and a coffee ring. 1 clipboard of temperature logs, filled in correctly for 9 days, and then in the same handwriting for the next 11, which is a thing that happens in every food service establishment on the planet. 1 laminated sheet on the wall about hand washing. 1 order pad blank. 1 receipt book. A photograph taped inside a cabinet door of the store's staff in 2011, standing in front of the building in 6 inches of snow. holding a hand-lettered sign that said "We never closed," which the Compact's analysts spent 2 hours on and which broke 3 separate people. And a single index card, taped above the pass, curled and grease yellow, on which somebody had written in ballpoint years ago, "If you're here, you're ours." Vane brought that card to Cade personally. "Prefect, we've found what I be. Leave is the operational motto." "Cade, read it again." "If you're here, you're ours," he said. "Analyst, that's a claim of jurisdiction." "That's how I read it, sir." "Over whom?" "That's the problem, sir." Vane turned the card over. There was nothing on the back. "It doesn't specify. There are no conditions on it." At 04:11, the Compact met Deputy Sheriff Marla Tate, and this was the moment Cade's model started coming apart, although he didn't realize it for another 6 hours. She had been sitting at the far end of the counter with her partner since 3:15. They had watched the entire landing through the window. They had not moved. At 04:11, she stood up, walked over to Cade, 5'4" in uniform with her thumbs in her belt, and said, "So you know you've knocked over a light pole." The translation unit rendered it. "You are a law enforcement officer of this territory." "I'm a county deputy, which means I am the specific law enforcement officer of this territory," Marla said. "And that light pole belongs to the county. And you have got 2 aircraft in a private parking lot with no permit. One of them is across the fire lane, and the dumpster enclosure is going to have to be rebuilt. And that's a claim against somebody, and right now the only somebody I've got is you. We have annexed this facility." "Okay, that's not a thing you can do." She pulled a notebook out. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you because it's 4 in the morning and I have been on since 6 last night. I do not have the authority to arrest you. I know that, you know that. There's 40 of you and there's 2 of us and one of us is Dale and Dale's got a bad hip." Dale, at the counter, raised a hand without turning around. "But I do have to write it up. That's the job. Something happens in my county, it gets written up, and it goes in a file, and the file exists whether anybody ever does anything about it or not." "Why?" Marla stopped, pen halfway down. "What do you mean, why? You have stated that you cannot enforce this. You have stated that you have no capability to compel us, and yet you intend to create a record." Cade's helmet tilted. "For what purpose?" "Because if it's not written down, it didn't happen," Marla said, "and things that happen have to have happened." She said it the way you'd explain gravity to a child. She went back to her seat. She wrote for 11 minutes. At the bottom of the report in the narrative section, she wrote, "Subjects uncooperative. Subjects appear to believe location is a government facility. Advised them it is a Waffle House. No further action possible at this time." That report is in the National Archives now. There's a line of people to see it. At 04:30, they got a translation problem, and I want to spend a moment on this, because it is the funniest single document to come out of the entire war. The Compact's linguistics section had been passively capturing the store's internal communications since the landing, which meant they had been capturing the order calls. If you have never been in a Waffle House at 3 in the morning, you need to understand that the ordering system is a genuine, functional, spoken code. It's not slang. It's an operational language developed over decades, designed to move complex information from a server to a cook across a noisy room in under 2 seconds without paper. Hash browns come 9 ways. Scattered means spread across the grill. Smothered is onions. Covered is cheese. Chunked is ham. Diced is tomato. Peppered, capped is mushrooms. Topped is chili. All the way is all of it. And plate positions are marked with condiments. A butter pat placed at a specific point on the plate tells the cook what the order is, because the plates themselves are the ticket. At 04:30, the Compact's senior linguist submitted an urgent assessment to Prefect Cade, and I am going to read you the actual excerpt, because it is verbatim in the after-action report. "Prefect, the facility's internal communication is a compressed operational cant. It is not the local vernacular. Structure appears to be modifier unit count designation. Sample intercept. Scattered, smothered, covered, 2, and drop a waffle. Scattered, dispersal instruction. Smothered, suppression. Covered, concealment or shielding, 2, unit count. Drop, ordnance release. Prefect, I assess with moderate confidence that we are listening to distributed tactical taskings, and that the phrase, drop a waffle, refers to a munition. Recommend immediate escalation." Cade, read that at 0434. At 0436, NRL submitted a dissenting assessment. Her assessment was 3 lines long, and it was correct, and it ended her chances of promotion for about 11 weeks and then made her career permanently. The intercept is a food order. A waffle is a food. Drop a waffle means to begin cooking a waffle because the batter is dropped into an iron. I have watched them, D. Oh, it 40 times in the last hour. Sir, we are transcribing breakfast. Cade did not read that until much later, because it was routed through the intelligence chain, and the intelligence chain had already decided. At 0441, the compact went to a heightened alert posture on the basis of a hash brown order. The reason nobody in that store was frightened is worth explaining properly, and it isn't bravado. It's that everybody in that building had already seen the place hold. Verna had worked the ice storm in 2014 when the interstate shut down, and 41 people slept on that floor for 2 nights, because there was nowhere else with heat and light between 2 exits. And Curtis had cooked through both nights, and the store had run out of everything except eggs and grits, and had kept serving eggs and grits. She'd worked the night after the tornado went through the county in 2017, when the store was the only lit building for 9 miles, and people came in not because they were hungry, but because it was lit, and she had let them sit, and she had not charged anybody who couldn't pay, and nobody from the company had ever said a word about it because everybody from the company already knew. She'd worked the Hurricane in 2018 on a limited menu, no waffles, because the irons draw too much, which had put that store into a federal disaster assessment as a yellow, and Verna had known that at the time and had been quietly furious about it for a week. So when armed aliens landed in her parking lot at 3:30, Verna Boyd's honest internal reaction was that this was going to be somewhere between the ice storm and the wedding party. At 0502, the 4th mistake happened, and it was the one that ended the invasion, and it happened because Prefect Osso Cade was actually a very good officer. He decided to stop guessing and ask. He came back inside and he sat down, in a booth, not standing over anybody, in powered armor at booth 4, which he did not fit into and which he broke slightly, and he asked Verna Boyd to sit down opposite him. She looked at the clock. It was 5 o'clock and the fishermen weren't in yet. She sat down. I need to understand this facility, Cade said. It's a Waffle House. That is what everybody keeps telling me, and I have to tell you that we do not believe it. He put both gauntlets flat on the table. Ma'am, your National Disaster Agency uses the operational status of this chain as a measure of catastrophe. That is in their own literature. A government does not do that with a restaurant. Verna considered this. Yeah, they do that, she said. That's real, that's a real thing. Why? Because we don't close. Why don't you close? And this is where Verna Boyd said the thing that is now on a wall in the compact's own staff college, translated into 11 languages, which she said while sitting in a booth at 5 in the morning with her hands around a coffee cup, without any idea she was saying anything important. Because somebody's always driving, she said. Cade waited. That's it, hun, that's the whole thing. There's always somebody on that road out there. She nodded at the window at the interstate at the headlights going by in the dark at 11-second intervals all night, every night, forever. Truckers, nurses, somebody's kid driving home from something they shouldn't have been at. Somebody who just got real bad news on the phone and got in the car because they couldn't sit in the house. Somebody who just left somebody. She turned the cup a quarter turn. And it's 3 in the morning and every single door in this county is locked. So where do they go? Nowhere, Cade said. They continue driving. They continue driving, Verna agreed, which is how people die on that road, or they come in here. And I sit them down and I bring them a coffee and I don't ask them one single question, and about 40 minutes later they're okay enough to drive. She shrugged. That's not a plan. Nobody wrote that down. It's just what happens if you leave the lights on. So the government measurement. The government measurement's about power and water and roads. If we're closed, it's because the roads are gone or there's no gas coming in, and that means everybody else is in a lot worse shape than we are because we're the ones who stay open. She almost smiled. They're not measuring us, hun. They're using us to measure them. Cade sat with that. Ma'am, my doctrine states that continuity indicates value. I have applied it for 31 years, and it has never been wrong. I found the one lit building in a dark country, and I assumed it was the most important building in this nation. Well, Verna said, at 3 in the morning it is. There was a long pause. But it's not a government, she said. It's a diner. There's a difference, and I think you've had a very confusing night. Cade should have withdrawn at 05:15. He didn't because between 05:15 and 05:40 the storm arrived. Not a big one. A line of severe thunderstorms coming up out of Alabama, the kind that region gets 11 times a year, with straight-line winds and enough rain to take out a distribution transformer. At 05:38, the power went out for 9,000 homes across 2 counties. At 05:39, every light in the Waffle House came back on. Because that store had a generator, the way a lot of them do, and the generator kicked over in about 4 seconds, and Curtis Ames did not look up from the grill. Now watch what the compact's own sensors recorded over the following 4 hours, because Cade watched it in real time and it destroyed him. The County Emergency Operations Center, 11 miles away, lost primary power and went to backup. Fine, that's what backups are for. But the county's fiber node went with the transformer, and the EOC's redundant link ran through the same cabinet, which is the sort of thing you only find out on the night it matters. Which meant that for 2 hours and 11 minutes, the Chandler County Emergency Operations Center had power and no data. At 05:51, a county emergency management coordinator named Dwayne Ellis drove 9 miles in the rain to the only building on that side of the county he was certain would be lit, with a laptop and a mobile hotspot, and set up on the end of the counter next to Roy, and coordinated a 2-county power restoration effort from store 1174 for the next 3 hours. Nobody had planned that. There was no protocol. There was no arrangement between the county and the company. Dwayne went there because he'd been going there since he was 19 years old, and he knew the lights would be on, and he knew Verna wouldn't ask him what he was doing. Verna brought him a coffee and moved the sugar caddy so he had room for the laptop. At 06:22, utility crews came in 8 and left with a route worked out on a paper placemat. At 06:41, a woman came in with 2 kids in pajamas because her house had no power and no heat, and the kids were scared, and sat in booth 2 for an hour and a half. And Verna put waffles in front of both children without being asked, and did not put them on the ticket. At 07:15, an ambulance crew came in on a rest break. At 07:30, the sheriff's day shift used the parking lot as a staging point because it was the only lit lot with a working light pole. There was some discussion about the one the aliens had knocked over. At 08:00, a man in a wet jacket came in, sat at the counter, ordered nothing, and cried for about 4 minutes while Verna wiped down the counter next to him and did not say a single word, and then he ordered a coffee and was fine. Prefect Aso Cade watched all of it from a booth he had broken, in armor, in a building he had annexed. At 08:47, he said to nobody in particular, "It is the continuity node." And Aurel, standing behind him, said, "Sir, it's the continuity node." Cade was still watching the room. "I was not wrong, sub-analyst. That's what's so remarkable. I had the correct assessment and the wrong reason. This is where this county's function is restored from when everything else fails and there is no plan and no authority and no designation, and it works anyway." He turned. "Do you understand what that means?" "I think so, sir." "It means you cannot take it," Cade said. "There is nothing to take. I have occupied this building for 5 hours. The building is not the asset. The habit is the asset. If I destroy this structure, they will do this in the next one, 11 kilometers up that road, and the reason they will do it is that a woman will be there with a coffee pot, and she will not ask them any questions." He was quiet for a moment. "I have spent 31 years taking things that could not be switched off," he said. "This is the first time I have found one that isn't a thing." The withdrawal order went out at 09:11. And the actual end of it, the part that everybody remembers, the part that's on the shirts, happened at 09:20, when Prefect Aso Cade of the Threshold Compact came to the counter to formally conclude the operation, and found that Verna Boyd had gone off shift at 7 and come back at 9 because Kimberly had called her, and said the aliens are still here and I don't know what to do about the ticket. "Ma'am," Cade said, "I am withdrawing." "Okay, hun." I intend to file a full report of this engagement and recommend permanent interdiction of this planet's road network at night. That's probably smart. I also intend to compensate for the light pole and the dumpster enclosure. Your law enforcement officer was quite clear. She usually is. Then Curtis Ames said, "Order," and pushed a plate across the pass. Cade looked at it. It was a waffle. One waffle on a plate, with 2 pats of butter placed at a specific position on the rim and a small paper cup of syrup beside it. I did not request this. Nobody requests it, Curtis said. You've been in my store 6 hours, sit down. I am not able to consume. Then take it with Y. Oh, Curtis said, and give it to somebody who can. I've cooked for everybody who's come through that door for 19 years, and I'm not going to start making exceptions at the end of a shift. He turned back to the grill. He had not, at any point in the entire occupation, looked directly at an alien. Verna printed the ticket. It came out of the machine, and she tore it off and put it on the counter face up, and there is a photograph of that ticket, and it has been reproduced approximately 11 million times. One waffle, $4.85 light pole, see Deputy Coffee, 11, on the house. The coffee's free, she said. You all didn't drink it, but I poured it, and I'm not charging you for something you didn't drink. Cade looked at the ticket for a long moment. Then he took off the outer gauntlet of his left hand, which is what an officer of the Threshold Compact does when he concludes an operation, and he laid it on the counter, and he did not offer it as a surrender because there was nobody to surrender to. He paid the $4.85. He is the only alien commander in the entire war to have paid a bill. The Threshold Compact's after-action report on the third planet runs to 1,100 pages and contains no combat because there wasn't any. The equipment inventory is short: 1 light pole, 1 dumpster enclosure, 1 booth structurally compromised, 211 liters of coffee poured and not consumed, listed as an expense the Compact insisted on covering and which the store's district manager insisted on refusing, in a correspondence that ran to 9 letters and which both sides eventually framed. Casualties, 0. Not 1 shot was fired in that building. The intelligence appendix is the part people actually read, and it contains, in full, the linguistic section's assessment that "drop a waffle" was an ordnance instruction, immediately followed by Subanalyst NRL's 3-line dissent, immediately followed by a single handwritten note from Prefect Cade in the margin, which reads, "She was right, I was told and I did not read it. Note this permanently." The summary line is 11 words, and Cade wrote it himself, and it is now the first thing you see when you walk into the Compact Staff College. The lit building was not the asset, the habit of lighting it was. The recommendation was permanent interdiction of that planet's continuously operating civilian infrastructure, approved by the Compact's High Assembly without debate, which is what happens when you attach a photograph of a $4.85 receipt to a report about the failed conquest of a world. The standing advisory has 1 line on it. Do not attempt to seize a structure that stays open for no reason. There is no reason. That is the reason. Subanalyst NRL was formally reprimanded for submitting a dissent outside the intelligence chain, and then 11 weeks later was given a directorate, because the Compact is bureaucratic but not stupid. The Directorate of Undocumented Systems is the first branch in Compact history tasked with identifying functional structures that have no manual, no authority, and no plan. Its founding document is 1 paragraph, and it says that the Compact's previous model looked for what a civilization had written down, and that the correct question is what a civilization does anyway. Rel keeps a laminated copy of the index card on her office wall. If you're here, you're ours. She has never explained it to visitors, and there is a standing bet among her staff about what it means. Deputy Marla Tate's report was never acted upon, in the sense that no charges were ever filed against anybody. She has a framed copy on her wall at home. The light pole was replaced in 9 days by a county crew who were extremely unpleasant about the paperwork. Dwayne Ellis coordinated a 2-county power restoration from the end of a Waffle House counter, and it went into the State Emergency Management Review as an example of effective improvised continuity of operations. He has been asked to present on it 4 times. He always begins by saying that there was no plan, and the audience always assumes he's being modest. and he never is. Kimberly Nguyen is a district manager now. Curtis Ames retired at 59. There is a plaque above the grill at store 1174 with his name on it, and it is at exactly the wrong height to read comfortably, which everybody agrees is appropriate. And Verna Boyd worked nights for another 4 years, and then went to days, and then went back to nights, because days are for people who like being able to hear themselves think. 4 years after the invasion, at 3 in the morning on a Sunday in October, a very tall man in a badly fitting coat came in off the interstate and sat down at the counter. Verna brought him a coffee without being asked. "You're back." "I am." "Table or booth?" "Counter," Cade said, "if that's permitted." "Counters for people who want to talk, V." RNA said, "Booths for people who don't, you want to talk." He thought about it. "I have 11 questions." "Then you're in the right seat, hun." And at 03:04 on the interstate outside, the headlights went past at 11-second intervals in the dark all night, the way they always do, because somebody is always driving, and every single one of those cars went by a lit yellow building on a frontage road with the door unlocked, and most of them didn't stop, and it didn't matter, because the whole point of the lights was never the people who came in. It was the people who knew they could. Here's the part actually worth taking away, and it's why this one gets told. The Threshold Compact didn't lose because humans were tough. Nobody in that building was tough. There was a 63-year-old woman with a coffee pot, a cook who wouldn't turn around, a deputy with a notebook and no authority, and a security guard named Roy who ordered the same thing for 6 years. They lost because they used a definition of importance that only counted things that were designed. If a system worked, somebody must have built it. If a node was critical, somebody must have designated it. If a building stayed open, it must be because a government needed it too. So the generator was scenery. The index card was a motto. The order calls were tactical code. The woman with the coffee pot was middle management. And the actual load-bearing structure of that county at 3 in the morning, one person who leaves the lights on and doesn't ask you any questions, didn't appear in the model at all, because you cannot detect a habit with a sensor. That's not a story about humans being special. It's just what happens on that road every night, whether anybody invades it or not. The interstate never empties. Somebody is always driving. Some of them are having the worst night of their lives at 2:30 in the morning with 200 miles to go. And somewhere off an exit there's a yellow building with the lights on, and it's open, and nobody in it is going to ask you a single question. FEMA measures disasters by whether that building closed. They're not measuring the building. If you made it all the way to the end with me, do me one favor, drop a comment and tell me which moment got you. Was it table or booth? The intelligence report on Drop a Waffle. The county emergency coordinator running a power restoration from the end of a counter. Or the prefect paying $4.85. I read all of them, and they genuinely helped this channel grow. And if you enjoyed this one, share it with somebody who'd appreciate it. That's the single biggest thing you can do to help these stories reach more people. Somewhere in a Threshold Compact archive, there's a permanent advisory about a small yellow building beside an interstate exit in Georgia. It doesn't mention the government. It doesn't mention FEMA or the county or the deputy at all. It just says that on that road, at 3 in the morning, the lights are on for no reason anybody can document. And that if you go inside, somebody will bring you a coffee before you ask, and will not ask you why you're there. And that this, and not the power grid, is the thing that species cannot be separated from.